Hello, my name is Rob Earlham, Senior Developer Advocate here at Sitecore. This video is the second in a two-part series introducing the brand new JavaScript SDK for Sitecore Discover. So let's dive in. Okay, so in the first video, we discussed the different implementation options for Discover, we introduced the SDK, and we looked at the eventing functionality and added that into our application so we could start to track how users are interacting with our site. In this second video, we're going to start to leverage the component functionality based into this SDK to deliver catalog data down to our Next.js commerce site. Now, there's three different ways you can add a component to a page, and we're going to see all three of these actions today. You have static components, which are created in the CEC and then dropped into the page by a developer. This is very developer-centric. It means the developer is specifying that this specific widget is going to appear at this specific area in the DOM at all times. The merchandiser can go and configure that widget after the fact, but they can't change that widget out for a different one. The second approach is dynamic widgets. And this is where the developer leverages what's called a widget tag. It's kind of similar to a placeholder in XM Cloud if you've used that, which then allows the merchandiser to dynamically insert widgets configured and created in the CEC. This means the developer can go and specify an area in the DOM, and the merchandiser can then go and add and remove widgets from that area without the developer having to get involved again. The final way of doing this is with a global component. And these are components that appear on every page. And if you think about a good example of this as being a header search bar in a B2C e-commerce site, it's there on 90% of the pages. It doesn't really change. It's a global widget that's always going to be the same across the different pages and routes of your site. We're also going to take a look at another couple of elements provided alongside the SDK here. We have a storybook implementation, which is a fantastic resource, showing the different widgets that are available, giving you a live demo of each of them, and code samples showing how to integrate them into your site. We're also going to take a look at templates, which take those small granular pieces of UI and combine those into larger pieces of functionality. For example, an entire search results page or a complex interactive preview search control. Alongside Storybook, we also have a CLI provided, which allows you to go and generate these components into your application directly from a CLI built for the SDK. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff we need to do today. Let's start writing some code. Okay, so before I start adding any components into my application, I'm going to show how they're configured within the CEC. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this widgets tab here. And this is where a merchandiser will define all of the widgets for their site. And we're going to be working with the top two in this page here. That's the REA homepage banner and the REA recommended products. And there's two different types of widgets when it comes to working with this SDK. There are HTML widgets and there are catalog widgets. HTML widgets, the layout is owned by the CEC. So it returns all the HTML for it and the SDK can render them without any more configuration. For catalog widgets, the layout and functionality is owned by your application. For those, we need to tell the SDK which components in our app to use to render them. And that's a crucial distinction that you'll notice as we go through here. You'll also see here the use of the RFK IDs here. These are how you define each of your widgets and refer to them specifically. And you can see we're going to be working with RFK ID 92 and also the REA homepage banner. So let's take a look at our homepage banner first. I'm going to go into its widget settings. And here is where you define how the widget is going to be rendered into your application. I'm going to change the appearance here, and this is where you can see how it's configured. You can see we've chosen a large image with two smaller images next to it, but if we use this choose another button, you can see there's a heap of different ones that come out of the box. Lots of different styles of panels, different styles of banners that are used for more advertisement promotion style widgets on your site. You can also go and create your own versions of these from scratch through the CEC, so the merchandiser really has a lot of control over what gets rendered here. If we go back, once you've chosen your appearance, you then get a series of settings to populate based on what you've chosen. In our case, we have 3 images, so we have to 3 times choose the href that the image links to, the URL for the image, which we're going to be pulling out of our DAM, and then you can optionally choose some other things like URLs for mobile and email versions. We're going to be using those today. If we go back, we can also take a look at our other widget. This is the recommended product widget. And this is a catalog widget. This is different. this is going to be rendering catalog data recommended by the AI. And this is controlled by recipes. So if we go into this recipe list here, it'll allow us to choose which one we want to use. We're just using the default all products one today, which is going to be a random assortment of products that the AI thinks is going to be applicable based on my browsing history. But there's heaps to choose from. You can see you could choose top ordered products, products that most often appear in the abandoned cart, best-selling products. And if you look at how small my scroll bar is here, you can see that this list really does go on quite far. And again, you can create your own custom ones here from scratch. So we've got our two widgets here. How do we actually add them to our page? How do we choose where in the site they're going to be added? Well, you do that on the pages section here. We're going to be mostly working with the home page for our site today. So I've created an REA home definition, and we're going to use that name later. That's going to become crucial. If we click into that, we're going to go and look at the settings for our default variation. And in here, we can see actually how our widget is going to be rendered with real data. So you can see it's pulling in real data from our storefront now, images from our DAM, but related to products shown from our site. We can see an example of what catalog items are going to be returned as well. Remember, the layout and functionality for catalog widgets isn't controlled by the CEC, so this is just an indicative layout here. For the HTML banner, this is actually how it's going to be rendered on our page. Okay, so let's start to add some of these into our site. So we're going to hop back to VS Code here, and I'm going to first of all load up my app.tsx. Remember, this is the page that gets rendered for every single route on my site. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to make use of a hook in here. Well, this time we're going to use the set widget type hook, which is a hook provided out of the React library in the SDK. We're going to add in the rest of my references first. And what we're basically saying here is for every recommendation type widget, if I don't explicitly say which widget to render as a developer, then fall back to this generic recommendation widget. Save that page. And if we look in this components section and inside Discover, I've created a bunch of these components ahead of time just to make things a little easier. And if we take a look at our generic recommendation widget here, it's a really basic component. We're using the use recommendation function here provided by the SDK to get the recommendation products we should render. Then we're basically going to map through our products and for each one display this simple product card component. Really basic. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to start to render these out on our homepage. But before we do that, let's take a look at the site and see where the best place is to render them. This is my homepage, and it's all currently statically generated. We have a HTML banner which looks very similar to this first one here, but I don't know if I want to make the first UI elements on my page be dynamic, because that's going to start to affect my page speed scores. I want to include my dynamic content lower down so I can leverage that blazing fast static content first. So we have a marquee next, then we have a text banner, then we have another HTML banner here. This looks like a good location to render out these two widgets because we have a product listing below as well. That looks like a good fit to me. So let's go back to our VS Code now, and we're going to go to the index page, the main page for the site. Jump to the top. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to make use of the use effect hook again. Add that in. What we're going to do here is basically execute this code every time the page is loaded. And what we're doing is basically telling the CEC which page it is we want to get data for. So we use the page controller, and we're using that REA home name that we saw on the page's definition in the CEC. That's how we're tying this route here to that specific definition in the CEC. We're then calling the use page widgets function. This is going to return me an object of data with two properties. The first is the isLoading property, which is a Boolean, which basically specifies whether the controller is currently requesting data. And you can use that to render spinners and things to let the user know that. The second is the actual data itself, the actual widget data we're going to be rendering out. So once we have that, we're going to start to add the UI components. Now we're going to leave the first product card together, we said, didn't we? The first grid. Next, we have a marquee, we got our hero text. This second grid, this was the one we were going to replace. And what I want to do first is work with some dynamic component insertion. So if we get rid of that one, and we're going to paste this code in. And if you remember, the dynamic insertion is the one I talked about where the merchandiser can choose what widgets appear. And that's what we've enabled here. We basically have two code blocks in this div. The first is for when the isLoading property is true. In that case, we're just going to render a div with the word loading, but again, you could add fancy spinners or something a bit more interactive at that point. We then have the opposite code block below. So when isLoading is false, we're going to take each of the widgets returned and we're going to render out the widget component here. That then means that the merchandiser can go into the CEC and really dynamically add widgets in or out of this page definition, and they're always going to be rendered at this place in the DOM. So they get a lot of freedom over what they want to add in there. If I save the page now, we'll go back to the browser. Hot reload kicks in, so you can see we straight away have our loading message. And now, further down, we have our HTML banner being rendered. And we have our product listing just below. As easy as that. The merchandiser could go in and change these now. They could change the properties for each of those widgets. They could remove those widgets. They could add completely different widgets. They're enabled to own that area of the DOM. I'm not sure I like these two product listings together here. That doesn't look great. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this recommendation widget, and I'm going to use it to replace this marquee widget above instead. And to do that's really quite simple. I'm going to hop back to VS Code again, and this time we're going to show an example of static component inserting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the first marquee above. Yes, this one. We'll get rid of that. And I'm going to use a marquee recommendation component, and I'm going to tie it to a specific widget in the CEC using the widget ID, RFK ID 92. So what we're saying now as a developer is that that widget will always be rendered at that location in the DOM. The merchandiser can go and tweak that widget. They could change the recipe behind it, showing different products, but they can't change it to a completely different widget altogether. That marquee recommendation component I added in, that's another component I created ahead of time. It's very similar to the generic recommendation component we looked at before, but now we're wrapping each of those product cards inside a marquee tag, so we get a nice horizontal scroll effect. We go back, save our page, and then we'll reload the browser, scroll up, and we can see now our marquee from before has been replaced. We now have our catalog data. The same data is being returned out of the CEC, but it's being rendered differently because the rendering and the functionality is owned by our React application. Another nice thing with this is if you scroll down, you'll see that widget is no longer rendered below. The SDK is smart enough to know it already rendered RFK ID 92 previously in the DOM, so it won't render it again further down to save on duplication of widgets by accident. Okay, so that's shown as static widget insertion and dynamic widget insertion. Next thing we need to look at is global widgets. I remember we talked about a good example being a search bar in a header, and that's exactly what we have here. You can see we have our search bar, but it's not very interesting, it's not very interactive. We can do a lot better with Discover. Before we do it though, I'm going to hop over to Storybook and show how you can use that to see these widgets in action. This is Storybook, and if you haven't used it before, it's a really nice set of developer documentation showing SDK and UI implementations. And you can see in the menu we have different widget types listed. We have recommendation widgets, we have preview search, we have search results. It shows you how you can do theming and styling, and it shows you more lower level components like individual pagination or sort components. We're going to be working with preview search first though, so let's expand that. And you can see it starts to give you lots of information about preview search. But one of the things I like is you actually get a real implementation of the component. So I can click on this, and this is a real preview search component, the exact same one we're going to be implementing. You can see you get trending categories on the left, you get products here, and as I keep saying, this is a real widget. I can go and type into here my exact things that I want to search for, and you get the data back. The nice thing here as well is it gives you the full code used to implement that. I can expand this index.js, and this is the full functionality for that component. You can see all the UI elements here being loaded in from that UI SDK package. This is built using a library called styled components, which basically allows you to define CSS in a sister JavaScript file that you can then reference. The nice thing about this is it gives you two encapsulated files that you can add into your application and use straight off the bat. And that's what I've done ahead of time here. If we go once more and look at my Discover folder, we can see I have a preview search style folder in here. And those are the two files that we just looked at in Storybook. The preview search left is the functionality, and the style.js is the styling for it. And this is going to get you like 70% of the way there, which is really good for quickly implementing functionality that you can test, make sure works, and then hand off to a designer. Or if you're just wanting to work quickly POCing whether some new functionality fits on your site. So let's go and integrate this. Now the existing search bar is in the common folder in the navbar component. I'm going to go into here and we'll just find where our search bar is. I'm going to paste in our preview search component instead. We'll add in our imports, and you can see once more, this is tied to a widget in the CEC that allows the merchandiser to control that preview search component. So they can define how many recommended categories, how many recommended products and the like. Let's go back to our browser again. We'll reload the site, and we can see straight away because of hot reload, the search bar's changed. I'm going to click on this, and you can see we have our nice rich search functionality here. I can go in here and maybe I want to search for some golf products. It'll recommend golf products to me. Maybe I'm more interested in cycling. I can go and type that instead. It gives suggestions. So maybe it's a cycling bottle that I'm looking for. Once you have the one that you're interested in, you can actually go and perform the search. Now I copy and pasted those files into my solution. The only thing I've changed is to basically wire up the keyword so it will actually go and perform the search and go and pass us over to the results page. And this is the results page you get with Next.js Commerce. This is the out-of-the-box one. And it's fine, it does a job how you want, but it's not that interactive and it doesn't involve enabling the merchandiser to make changes themselves. Any changes are developer controlled. So if we hop back to Storybook, we can see there's an example of a search results component as well. This is something we can build out using Discover. If we scroll down, we get another real world example. This is a true example of a search result component that you can interact with. You can change the sort order. You can go and edit the faceting and all of these, and all of it's interactive. This is the real component you're working with. Once more, you get the index.js for the functionality, and you get the style.js, which provides the basic styling for it. If I hop back to VS Code and go and take a look in our Discover folder once more, we have our search results component. It's in there. We have our functionality. We have our styling. So we can implement that as well. We go down and find our search page. Now the search page is pretty simplistic. It's all just rendered by one giant component. So we're going to have to change that. Let's add a bit more functionality in. We'll remove the old component and then we'll add our references. We'll also add a reference to the layout. So we get a bit of styling that matches. And you'll see it's again tied to a specific component within the CEC, which is where the merchandiser can go and control all these things. If I save the page, we'll then go back and reload the browser. And you can see hot reload's kicked in. And now we have a search result page powered by the CEC. We have faceting over here powered by the CEC. We have sort order powered by the CEC, pagination, results per page. All of this is now controllable by the merchandiser. Let's say I don't want users to be able to refine using faceting on final price. I can change that in the CEC without a developer getting involved. Let's say I want them to be able to refine by category. I can again add a category facet in the CEC without a developer getting involved. This is enabling the merchandiser to take control of their sites so they can make these changes much more quickly and agilely. Okay, so the last thing I want to show is the CLI. Now, the Storybook implementation is great. You can go in there, you can copy and paste code, but you may not want to be working with copy and paste. You may want to use a CLI to generate these components for you, and you can do that. If we look in the root of my site here, we have this SC Discover settings.json, and this defines basically one property which says where my components exist in my components Discover folder, which is where we were looking before. Now I have that set up, I can run the npx SC Discover new widget command. This is going to start an interactive prompt that's going to ask me a few questions to allow me to generate a widget. The nice thing you'll notice here is we only had JavaScript available in Storybook. We're working on getting TypeScript in there as well. But if you go for the CLI, you can generate TypeScript as well. So let's do that. And what should we generate? We've done preview search. Let's do a different recommendation one. Let's do a recommendation gallery style this time. It's confirming that it's found my settings JSON and that I do want to create it in that components Discover folder. And then I give it a name. So let's go recommendation gallery. And there we go. We can see straight away it's created those components. We have the index TSX, which contains all of the functionality. We can scroll down and we can see all of the UI elements here being used out of that UI SDK library. And we have the sister style.ts, providing some initial styles that'll get it up and running. Okay, so let's add that to the site. Before I do that, let's start the site running locally again and get the terminal out of the way. Then let's go back to our homepage, and I'm going to replace that marquee recommendation with the recommendation gallery we just created. It probably won't fit the UX very well, but it'll at least show just how quickly and easily you can generate these components using the CLI and drop them straight into your application. We'll save that page, we'll hop back to the site, and then we'll go to the homepage. And we can see we're waiting for it to load, and there we go. We now have an interactive gallery of products instead. And this highlights again that the rendering and functionality of catalog widgets is owned by the application, not by the CEC. It's the same catalog data being returned, but now we're rendering it out in a completely different style than we did before. Okay, so we've covered quite a lot across these two different videos. I just want to finish with some conclusions and some key points that I like. So you can use Discover as much or as little on your implementations as you like. We have customers who've gone all in, powering every single piece of catalog data across all their channels using Sitecore Discover, and they're driving fantastic value from it. At the other end of the spectrum, we have customers who are really targeted, just using individual pieces of catalog data sprinkled throughout their different channels. And it could be any of the options in between there as well. You really can use Discover as much or as little as you like across your different implementations. The second thing is it's just as easy to implement Discover across an existing storefront as it is a new greenfield project. In this video, we used Next.js Commerce with Sitecore Order Cloud on the back end, but it could have been any of the other e-com platforms out there today, and it would have been just as easy to implement over the top as well. If you want to make use of the JavaScript SDK, it is available today on our documentation site. You can see the URL on the screen, and if you go there, it'll give you tips on how to get started and where you can download it from. Finally, if you do opt to use the SDK, don't forget to make use of all the supporting features that are created out there. Things like Storybook, the CLI, and the documentation site. They're all there to help you get up and running and build your app as quickly as possible. Thanks everyone for watching this two-part series. Hopefully you found it useful. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat below. And thanks for watching.